Sam ends up in LA, out in Cali, doing his thing. Obviously, Butter went out there as well. And I've said the same thing to Sam and the same thing to Butter when I've spoken to them. But how did a group of Pittsburgh producers and musicians reinvent the sound of the West Coast when you guys went out there? Because it was a very decided shift in the music out there. And when you start looking at liner notes and production credits and things like that, you see Sam Sneed, you see Butter, you see Stu-B-Doo. Like, you're starting to see these guys, and you realize that they're coming out of Pittsburgh. So how does that happen?
Well, during the time that Sam took off, Sam was like, I'm gonna be carrying the crates and luggage for the homies at the Hit Squad. And then he ended up in California. He went to the Bay Area, and there was a show that they all were doing, and with Too Short, all these other OGs on the West Coast, and then Dre was performing, and nobody knew who Snoop was. He was just bringing Snoop around and this and that. And then what happened was Sam called me. He says, I met Dre. You know what I mean? I'm going to go to LA. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, I'm going to LA and get with Dre. So he got with Dre right when Death Row was on top of the world. He finished, that was like right after he finished the Chronic. He was getting ready to work on some, new material, this and that. And, Sam was like, yo, you need to come out here. I told Dre all about you. And I was like, I can't, I'm in college. And he was like, you need to come out here. Like, Dre want to see you. You know what I'm saying? But you gotta just come. So he put me on the phone with Dre. Dre was like, you know, Sam, tell me you like one of the best musicians on the planet representing Pittsburgh. If you are who you say you are, come out here, And I told him, all right, what I'm saying, I'm gonna do it. And so I went back home. I went and told my mom and my dad. I told my mom first. I said, Mom, I'm gonna go to LA and I'm gonna go work with Dr. Dre. And she was like, oh my God, that's amazing. Wow. You know what I'm saying? So she went to
Yeah.
church. She went and told everybody that, oh, my son, he's in pre-med, he's working, doing biology at school. And some doctor, Dr. Dre, asked him to come to LA to work with him. I'm so proud of him. And so the people at church was like, oh, do you know who Dr. Dre is? And my mom was like, no. So they told her who Dr. Dre was. And then she came back and waited for me to come home. And she was like, she told my dad. So her and my dad were waiting for me to come home from college. And then they were both standing out in the front yard. And I'm like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. This don't look right. And so my mom says, you are not going to LA. You're not going to be working with this Dr. Dre. I hear he's a gangster. I hear he's a rapper. I hear like all this stuff, da da da, this and that. You're not doing it. And then I told my parents, I'm going. And my dad said, well, if you're going to go, you're cut off. You know what I'm saying? Like, we can't support
Oh,
you on
wow.
that because we did everything to get you into college. You know what I'm saying? And they want me to do what they wanted me to do. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
And even though they put me through music was, again, like I said, we all were musically inclined, but it was for us to not to for us to learn more discipline in life with music education, and it helped with school and math and stuff like that. But I took it very, very serious. Besides my brother and sister, very serious. And I hadn't. I was determined. After I heard Dre tell me to come out there, I was going. So I told my mom, I'm gone. I'm out. So I packed up everything and drove across country. and met, Dre and all them, put me up in a corporate living over at Toluca Lake, the Oakwood Apartments. And then, um, that's what happened. It was just like, it was me. Sam was already there. By that time, Dre and Sam were like best of friends and all that. Really
Yeah.
cool, right?
Yeah.
And Dre was single at the time, and he was just open. What to answer your question about how did all of us cats get out there and formulate the sound was, you know, we Dre and Sam and I used to go to Jimmy Iovine's house. We would go to Glasstones in Malibu, have dinner on Saturday night, and then we end up at Jimmy Iovine's house to hang out and watch movies because Jimmy had this movie theater. We would watch the newest movies that didn't come out yet. You know what I'm saying? It was just like,
Yeah.
wow, you know what I mean? MTV people were hanging out there. And Dre and Jimmy Iovine and myself were in the garage in Jimmy's garage, the weight by the weights. And Jimmy said, Dre, gangster music is dead. Like literally. Like he said, I love all the music that we done. You know what I mean? Interscope is doing well, this and that, but you're only being played in this region, in this territory. We need you to reinvent yourself, Dre. You know what I mean? Like Madonna, like all the other artists that had to like pivot, make, grow, evolve. And he explained it. He said like this. He said, Stu-B-Doo. He says, how do you know Dre? I'm like, it's Dre. I know Dre. You know what I mean? He's like, no, no, no. He said, how how did you first know of Dre? And I said, oh, he's one of the dopest producers that I've ever known in Pittsburgh. And he was one of our targets. And he was like, did they play Dre on the radio out there in Pittsburgh? And I was like, nope. He was like, what did they play? And I was like, all the stuff from the East Coast. You know what I'm saying? Like all the East Coast hip hop stuff was being played in our region, not too much West Coast music at all. And I never heard Dre on the radio. And then Jimmy Iovine was like, that's correct. He said, he said two reasons, Dre, is because A, your music is very underground. It wasn't really played on the radio. I mean, because all the things that you were talking about, you guys were talking about. And it wasn't, and during that time, this is when parental advisory was being put on records because of what Dre and all them were saying. You know what I'm saying? Him
Hmm.
and Easy and all them were kicking up a lot of dust with the F the police and all the other stuff that was happening before me, right? And so he explained that you need to reinvent this to yourself. And so that's when Dre was like, thinking about how can he change the music. So we start going back to Can-Am Studios and working on stuff. And then that's when Sam, he got put on at Death Row. He was an artist slash producer. He got signed. He was the first that got signed, right? And then Sam started bringing out like the rest of the crew. So, you know, we got Butter out. That Butter came out after me. Um, we brought a bunch of other cats from New York and Cleveland, like Jay Flex, um, Stocks McGuire. He was called Drama. So we had a bunch of writers and other producers that, from Pittsburgh and from the other parts like Ohio and New York. And we created this group called Street Scholars. You know what I'm saying? And this was the thing that Sam wanted to produce. He wanted all of us to produce that sound for Sam, right? And what happened was we started recording these songs, and then this is when uh, we would go back to Jimmy's. We'd go have dinner at Glasstones, end up at Jimmy's, and Jimmy be like, "What you got?" And then Dre would play all this stuff from the other homeboys, like from the Dog Pound. You know what I mean? Some of the producers like LT Hutton and Barney Rubble and all the other guys that was doing music. that came from the West Coast. And then Jimmy Iovine was like, nope, nope, next, no, next. And then Dre turned and started playing Sam Sneed and my music and Butter music. And then he was like, Jimmy Iovine was like, stop that. What's that? What's that? I want to hear more of that. I want to hear more of that. That's where you should go. You know what I mean? And then that's when Dre was like, you know, kind of like all hands on deck for Sam Sneed and his producers. You know what I'm saying? So that's when Dre started like having me come to his house and record at his house. And, you know, aside from everybody that was at Can-Am Studios or at Ocean Way or all the other studios, I was recording at his house. Me and Sam would go and record too. And then we eventually Butter was making beats and stuff and getting, you know, things going on. And it was the music that I was making had my orchestral type of influence to it. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, Pittsburgh had not only like Pittsburgh's a huge arts town, as you know. Like we had George Benson, you know what I'm saying,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of other, you know, jazz people and you know, there wasn't hip hop wasn't a thing in Pittsburgh, but there was a lot of jazz, and then we had a lot of people from Cleveland coming to Pittsburgh, like Levert, the OJs, uh, Roger Troutman and Zapp. Like, you know, my cousins live right down the street from the Troutman. So it was a lot of that influence from Pittsburgh that we kind of like started putting in our music, you know, pulling up all the Zapp stuff and when I
Mm-hmm.
was pulling up Roger's stuff, it wasn't just because Zapp was dope. It was because he lived down the street from our house and we used to be in Zapp's basement listening to them play when we were kids. So it was like a lot of that influence plus my orchestral influence was being put in samples and we would make these beats. And then, you know, that's when, you know, these songs were starting to, I say manifest
Mm-hmm.
because Dre would, you always knew when Dre was going to start working on something next or get ready to put something out next was because he would play those tracks in his truck and he would show up at the studio banging the music. And when you heard that music, all of us producers and all of us artists like Corrupt and Daz and you know what I mean, everybody, DJ Quick, everybody that was there, um, we would hear Dre pull up, and if he was playing that song, we would look at each other and be like, "Oh, that's Stu-B-Doo's track. Hey Stu, you about to get put on, man." You know what I'm saying? Like they
Yeah.
knew because I guess that's how it happened to Quick, or they know how that happened with the guys before me. You know what I'm saying? Like Barney Rubble with, you know, and all these guys that was doing gin and juice and stuff like that. So that's how like, you know, Sam was like putting all of us together. We had this street scholar sound that we were working, and it was supposed to be for Sam Sneed's album. And then, you know, a lot of these things like Dre was so close with Sam, you know, he was just leaning on us through Sam. He was leaning on us to produce a lot of stuff. And it just seemed that Dre was spending a lot of time in our sessions, right? You
Yeah.
know what I'm saying? And nobody else knew why except Jimmy Iovine. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So because Drake kept that kind of hush about reinventing his sound and stuff like that.
Now those tracks that you were playing for Jimmy Iovine were what do you remember what tracks those were? Like were those tracks that eventually ended up, you know, becoming songs that got released or what was that early stuff that Jimmy was so adamant that that was the sound that needed to come out next?
I think that it wasn't stuff that we like mainly produce. It was just a lot of stuff that we put together. Like,
Okay.
so Dre would have like a foundation of a beat, or Sam would have a foundation of a beat, and then we would just go over the tracks with our instrumentation and stuff like that. And these were all like demos, you know what I mean, of just being really, you know, creative, just doing stuff that we felt like doing. And this was the stuff that we made was kind of like off the time from when we were in the studios doing stuff for other people, like the Dog Pound or all the other people. They wanted that G-Funk, you know what I mean? They wanted that stuff, but with our touch to it, right?
Yeah.
And that was kind of how, the Dog Pound was working on stuff at the same time as we were working on the Street Scholar stuff. And so, we spent a lot of time, like, Ricardo Corrupt was like my homeboy, and he's from Philly, and you know what I'm saying, and we had a lot of synergy, and Daz was really cool, and everybody was like family. So we, this was during the time where Death Row was on top of the world. We about to, Snoop was killing it. He came out with Doggy Style, and everybody was just celebrating the release of Snoop's record, and so there was like, okay, all that G Funk stuff was still continuing through Snoop and his crew, and then the Street Scholars was kind of doing like a mixture of East Coast hip hop samples, and you know what I mean, but instruments being played over it from what we were doing, and then me adding that orchestral sound to it, you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
that's what Jimmy started turning to, because these were like demos, and these weren't like the ones that Dre would go to first. Dre was
Hmm.
like, Dre would go to like his hit makers first. They were the people that made hits for him already. So it was like Barney Rubble and all the stuff they did, and you know what I mean, and Dog Pound and all them. They were getting their listen for Jimmy Iovine, but it was that the songs that we were doing for Sam and the songs that we were doing for Dre, because Dre was like, I'm gonna do my own album, and then he was talking about he wants to do a collaboration with Cube when he gets back from New York, because Cube took off and got with the Shockley brothers, and took the Lynch Mob with him, and you know what I mean, it was just like all this stuff going on, and those were the sounds that we were just making tracks, and me, Dre, Sam, Bud, all of us, we would start making all types of other stuff, and just having fun with it. And then when we end up at Jimmy's, Jimmy would just be like, I like that, and because he's kept saying I like that, and this is like commercial, and you know the lyrics, the choice of words that we were using wasn't like, it had that gangster umph to it, but we were like being more like methodical, and about what we were saying, and we were talking about the current times, and we were being more relative towards things that not only happen on the West Coast but also on the East Coast, because we were just kind of talking about everything that we experienced, all together, which was short of what my homeboys, my brothers on the West Coast was doing. All they knew was, what they experienced in their own neighborhoods, and all the things that they were doing. They were putting it through their music, and it was dope. But Dre was just, he was trying to figure out how to do his own thing. And that was kind of like how the sound started developing into, you know, the sound that was moving forward into our commercialization. And that's how I say like the Pittsburgh sound was deeply embedded in it, because by the time it was all said and done, all the hit songs that was being produced by all of us. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? And and that's when it was painfully obvious. When I say painfully obvious, it was obvious not only to ourselves but our peers and everybody else that Dre got his crew. You know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? And his crew wasn't Snoop and the Dog Pound, and Snoop had his crew, and Quick had his thing, and everybody had their groups and the people they would go to, and even though we were all family, and everything was doing that, it just seemed that we were just dedicated to doing stuff for Dre. You know what I'm saying, at
Yeah.
that time.